my perspective as a policymaker, scientific policymaker, this is really the most important part of this workshop because this is paving the way for the next and future activities. So if I may ask the rapporteur to say in 5 minutes on what aspects exactly they, even less, 4 minutes,
Okay.
on what aspects the discussion actually focused and what are the recommendations on short and long term. And as I told you this morning, I would be especially interested to know what are propositions for very short-term activities using the existing initiatives and projects. The outcome of this workshop will be reported tomorrow in plenary during the forum, and that will be done by Sara, who's the Blue Cloud coordinator. So she will take the notes from all the moderators for the panel and report that tomorrow in session. So first, thank you all for your contribution, and I suggest we start with Toste and Telmo.
Okay, so we talked about citizen science and how we can engage citizens in ocean observing and ocean data uptake. I think one theme that came through the whole session was the building of trust for the science, for the citizens. What are we reporting on? Who's going to take up that data, and whose information does actually matter in the end? And trust goes also for the observational citizens, that the data, the effort that they do actually get used. In that term, it's really important to have tools so that the people, everybody, can download all the data, not just your own data, but everybody else's data. And you can look at that, and you can make your own statistics, and so on. So there is a feedback that what you actually did matters. In that term, it's also very important to have tools where the information upload is easy and simple. Mostly, you can probably do that by a cell phone app. There could be things where, like you report plastic. We talked a lot of plastic because plastic is unfortunately an easy way to do with citizens. You can go out and you can count plastic on the beach. You can report plastic floating in the ocean, take photos, year-reference photo, and upload that to different platforms. We also talked about observing animals, whales, mammals, fishes, birds. So this is another way of engaging citizen sciences on that. We're talking about jelly watch and looking at jellyfish. That kind of visual observations is something that is relatively easy. You don't need very much of instrumentation to do that. But we also talked about a little bit more advanced level of citizen scientists, where you actually you make sure that they have some kind of sensor that they can report hard data rather than observations. And this includes observations of marine weather on boats. Could be sensors on sea surface temperature, salinity, oxygen, maybe even cheap, inexpensive CTD profilers where you can deploy as a citizen. Maybe there you could build up a system where you can share sensors like that to citizens in areas where it does make sense. And I think the main conclusion is that trust between the citizens and the scientists has to be there, and there has to be science support. This is nothing that happens by itself. There has to be resourcing on the science side to build the portals for output and input of data. If you don't have that, and if you engage a lot of citizens to go out and make observations and they don't feel the feedback, they don't see results, you're going to disengage, and you do want to engage. So that's very important to have that link functioning. I think we've seen many systems that didn't have that science part well developed and it failed. We have seen many that does have it well developed and it actually is a success. So did I forget anything?
I don't know, but I have something to stress out, just to add up to what you were saying, very, very briefly. That is the importance of creating common standards to gather the information in order that the trust between the citizens and the scientists exists. That means that the scientist knows that the citizens will collect the data that they need in a certain way. And it's good to have common standards and guidelines in order that the citizen science can be comparable in different parts of the territories. That's the only thing that I would like to add up.
And we heard a very nice example from South Africa, a program called Albaloni, I think, where fishermen actually report catch and where they catch and actually additional information about size and species and so on. That is useful for the authorities in South Africa to understand fisheries. But there was an immediate feedback to the fishermen. They got a report back on, well, with this catch, you probably go to that market because that's going to give you more money for your catch. So creating that immediate feedback is an engagement tool. And I know there are other projects in Europe where they engage fishermen to take observations of temperature, and the feedback they do get is better weather forecasts and forecasts of where you actually can go to do fishing. So that immediate feedback, if you can create that, that's useful.
Thank you, Toste. Thank you, Telmo, and thank you all the members of that panel. I'm destroying that thing. If I can jump maybe first to Ben, I think it would follow a logical order.
Yes, so we were discussing knowledge gaps and potential partnerships. There was some initial discussion about satellite data and the gaps between spatial and temporal resolution, as well as focus direct measurements as they tie in with the remote satellite measurements. And then largely we moved over to discuss the feedback between citizen science, native and indigenous community science, contributing with correct metadata or some form of metadata that can tie it to scientific measurements, and that enabling products to be delivered to those same communities and citizens in a meaningful manner, as topic one soon to move, as well as some potential partnerships bringing together policymakers and academic and industry for focus of fit-for-purpose measurements in correct locations. So where the measurements actually matter to industry that's operating in the blue economy, whether it be fisheries or oil and gas or renewable energy, you don't have to measure everything every time, as that gets very expensive. But measuring enough to characterize the site is what's important. And another partnership of bringing the data science industry in to collaboration with academic research and industry research.
Thank you, Ben. Any concrete proposition for an action on the short term?
Probably not concrete. I'll see if I can distill a bit further, but no, we're short on time.
Okay, thank you. Dick and Sara?
We look at how to bring the different data intersections and how to connect them across the Atlantic.
Yes. First of all, we think it should not be simply on a voluntary basis, because then, let's say, then we have very nice meetings, but we do not get the energy or let's say the further follow-up of the actions. So it would be nice, let's say, to organize sort of a project, let's say, between the different infrastructures, different regions, supported by their own funding agencies, authorities. And in this way, let's say, bringing together their experiences on the different topics which are necessary for connecting the infrastructures. And this way, that's developing the interoperability, especially, and getting things together. And what you see is that when you start with the interoperability, later also you will go then to the reusability, because that's also one of the niche areas that we all are struggling with, how to make the data more fit for many purposes. And then you can see that you have a lot of common niche, let's say, common niche, but also to get very creative together and accelerate the solutions. And that means that it's based upon federation, so it doesn't mean that we make standards and everybody has to oblige to the standards. Now we base it on federation. It means that we are interoperable with each other. That means that I always gave the example also last time that somebody is French, he speaks French, I speak Dutch, and we speak English together. That's an interoperability solution. But if you have areas which nobody has an answer, then you can make common standards, and then you put all your forces together. But it should be, let's say, under in an organized project or an organized framework, by which everybody can do the work with a high priority, and also spend the time needed, and also being sanctioned, let's say, by their local authorities or by their local institutes to work on these things. And then you can then really do it in a sort of a project engineering operation. That means that there will be you need a lot of coordinated actions. And what you can do is something like do it around prototyping. That you make a common prototype that everybody has to bring his bit or her bit. And this way you would build up something, and then you have several, let's say, workshops every 9 months or whatever to see, well, how's it progressing, and from there you monitor and you make the next actions. And that's something that is, of course, to get things rolling, but then we have to also make a long-term vision. I go to roadmap.
Yeah, and so this could be the short-term action that we have identified. So in Blue Cloud, we are building this roadmap to agree on this long-term vision in Europe, but we think that this long-term vision should be shared among all the continents if we want to go for a global Blue Cloud. So that's why we will invite all the people that are participating to this workshop to identify experts or contributors that want to provide their feedback on the long-term vision for this global Blue Cloud. And this is already a sort of our mean to establish this short-term collaboration. So.
Yeah, and there was also one thing that some countries might be reluctant, let's say, to join such an operation. And there was a brilliant idea, let's say, to start with maybe simulating a disaster or something that is really, in this way, let's say that you make a demonstrator which shows that what could you do if you would have had the data, or you can see what the other countries have, and they can provide the data by which you can save, let's say, or make the economic impact of a disaster less for your country, if you were informed in time. And there are many examples already in reality about this case. But that might be a way, let's say, let's call it a simulation, to demonstrate and to put also other more reluctant countries, let's say, on your side to join that initiative and to give it the merits. And also giving their researchers and their data producers, etc., the space to work on this, and not being on the sideline. That's one idea, let's say. For
excellent. Thank you, Sara and Dick.
We have much more, but we want to.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Last but certainly not least, Skye.
Okay. So we had a great discussion, very broad, but also some key takeaways. We identified the gaps in communicating ocean science to citizens as in a few main areas. One being the main one being siloed communication frameworks. So this can include both as high up as just general age. We're all adults here talking about this, and how do we engage youth and youth feedback systems to help support the next generation of communicating science, both in form, in terms of semantics loss between stakeholders and communities with disregard to jargon, just the disciplinary frameworks there, and then also at the infrastructure level. We all have these different departments, even within our own buildings, within universities, and if we just formulate, help either fund or support either workshops or something that brings these groups together, we can even in a digital space, we can foster those kinds of relationships. The scientific process in general, the time cycle of science, and life cycle is not disseminated in a valuable way, and we think there can be an effort to push, to kind of engage people with how much time, effort, and the nuances of the scientific process for people who perhaps did not, didn't study science or study policy. There was an interesting, some media people in our group, they were talking about this disconnect between media and how it's important to develop relationships, ongoing relationships with media, from TV to local groups to better communicate science. That there's, how do we tackle this information bias of as soon as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, as soon as we hear something, it keeps being repeated, and how can we better engage people with the scientific process. More and more people are on Twitter, but social media is so disparate, and it's that effort and time is not funded, even though a lot of people find out the latest papers that way. And so how can we formalize and credentialize that and support that? There was even I thought that one of the most compelling ideas at the end was this idea about just using AI to kind of synthesize those different aspects that scientists and different policy groups are putting together, and think about how can we communicate that in a new way. Finally, there's a big push for how do we, people are so excited and curious about science, but we usually answer it with very discrete expert answers. And so how can we move the narrative and storytelling for policymakers and scientists back towards that curiosity stage? And again, there's lots of funding. What are funding mechanisms that drive the evaluation component of science communication? Often NSF and others, they'll fund the broader impacts aspect of a grant, but it's not evaluated or enforced in a way that is assessing how valuable that scientific communication was. So developing a bit better, honing in on that model.
Thank you, Skye. There's indeed a lot of potential for progress in the way we communicate, and I think you gave a lot of possible direction that we will need to take on board in all our activities. So unless somebody has a very burning question, I will then close. Oh, I'm saying no. So no burning question. I will close the session. I don't know if, Sara, if you have any logistic aspects, but in any case, I would like to thank you all for your participation, for your presence. And I suppose you're all going to be present for the next 2 days. So I wish you an excellent conference, and I hope you will find it interesting.